Early this week, the tragic story of a plane that crashed in India, killing everyone but one person on board, has made headlines everywhere across the globe. The 787 Dreamliner that went down has raised a whole lot of flags as to how it went down, considering how quickly after takeoff it did. So, we're going to cover the article that's related to it to see exactly if there's any more news that comes out about it. Apparently, there is one whistleblower that had come forward to warn about certain issues that was there about the plane, and he may have been ignored. The problem is now to find out who did he tell and who do we point the finger at, especially when it comes to how many casualties there were. Last year, a former quality manager at Boeing warned that the factory that made the 787 Dreamliner and one of the company's newer models of airplane was plagued by shoddy work practices and poor oversight. John Barnett, who had worked for the airplane manufacturer for many years before becoming one of its most outspoken critics, said that Boeing was building the planes with substandard parts and that its mandate of speed and efficiency was endangering lives. Now, hey, whoa, 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 whoa. I have people I know that work for Boeing. And if this is indeed the case, this is going to go more than just to the heads of Boeing and to certain departments. This is going to go to protocol as well, because it's going to go to who buys the parts, where they buy the parts from, and it could also go to the designers and the architects. Can be a nation, could end up shutting down Boeing if what they're saying is true, to the point where parts were used, the places they were made, and how they were put together. If it was all inefficient, it would have been with malicious intent. You'd have to think that if it was done as a part of their protocol. That's the biggest issue I can see right now with just that. The mandate and speed efficiency endangering lives. Barnett, who refused to fly on his Dreamliner, was also involved in a legal dispute with the company at the time that he died of an apparent suicide. Yesterday, the plane that Barnett had warned regulators about crashed in Ahmedabad, India, killing all but one of the passengers. The worst aviation disaster in recent memory, the crash that spurred fresh scrutiny of the controversy-plagued manufacturer. Meanwhile, it will take months to understand what actually caused the crash. And if the source of the disaster ends up being the vulnerability in the plane's design, it won't be particularly surprising. Barnett, whose death sparked conspiracy theories due to involvement in the legal cases of his former employee, was one of the long list of critics who have long expressed concern that the company's manufacturing practices. And I remember his story. At the time, people had thought that maybe that because he had come forward, that Boeing themselves had set things in motion to end him. When word came out that it was a suicide, everybody thought, right, I'm sure with the kinds of things he was saying, I'm sure that's exactly what he did, because he had all kinds of reason to end himself, considering that he was about to blow the lid on something so magnificent. If that was the case, this may actually come out in the report, or at least in the investigation when they do look into this, not just as part of the investigation of the plane, but the whistleblower if he did this years ago, they would have to look into that as well, because he would have been warning people from forever ago. The 787 was launched in 2011 with one of the advertised benefits being that Boeing could manufacture the aircraft more cheaply than its previous model. So by their own admission, they might have already sealed their fate. However, from the get-go, the plane was ridiculed for having an overly complicated assembly process. One critic, writing in 2013, noted that the plane was put together through a convoluted network of contractors, some of whom offered limited transparency. Another aviation commenter said that it was as if Boeing had said, F it. Let's throw out everything we've ever known or used in airplane production and use this new unproven method. Now, listen, money could make you do a lot of silly things. If I could find a way to make a mad amount of money from the sales of the plane and save money on the production of it, and nobody would question me, and I had no integrity, I'd probably do that. It wouldn't be the first time a manufacturer would have done that. Cut corners to save the cost in order to make more money on the sale. If that is the case, you might see a bunch of lawsuits coming on the tail of this one, and it might end up putting Boeing itself out of business. Now, remember, Boeing is not just aircrafts. Boeing is also in the military side of things too. They make a lot of weaponry, and they make a lot of the airplanes for the military as well. This could have a very big impact on the U.S. military, and it's far more reaching than just travel from state to state, country to country. Critics noted that the company had outsourced many of the parts to to many different contractors, and that they were at risk that all of those components might not properly fit together when the craft was finally assembled. Upon launch, the plane was almost immediately plagued by technical problems. In 2013, a series of battery-related fires in the aircraft cabins caused FFA to ground all the 787s in the U.S. until the safety issues could be resolved. In 2015, the U.S. Air Safety discovered a software bug in the plane's generator control units that hypothetically could lead to a loss of control by the plane's pilots. The plane also suffered from fuel leaks and other issues. That don't sound like a plane. Look, I like flying. I do. I love flying. But if I ever heard of any plane having just half of those issues, I'm walking. I will walk across water. I will take a boat, and I mean paddle. I won't even take an engine boat. I would much rather trust that with sharks in the water than that plane. And you allowed the plane to still be manufactured? Okay, it might be more than Boeing to blame. FFA might have some answers to give too, because eventually they did sign off on whatever repairs or changes that were made. Apparently, the changes were not enough. In 2019, the New York Times reported for the first time on a South Carolina plant that the Dreamliner was manufactured, noting that it was alleged to be plagued by shoddy production and weak oversight that have threatened to compromise safety. Barnett, who at the time had already left the company, was quoted heavily in the article saying that he hadn't seen a plane come out of Charleston yet that I'd put my name on saying it's safe and airworthy. After Barnett's death, another whistleblower who had formerly served as an engineer at Boeing, Sam Selafor, claimed that the deficiencies in the way of the 787 were assembled could cause the aircraft to break apart in mid-air. We're yet to see exactly what happened with this crash, but I've seen the video, and from the looks of the video, it barely got off over the buildings at the end of the runway and just went straight down. Could it have been that it started to fall apart? There's even footage of inside the plane, the people recording once it started to fail, and nothing was working. Remember early in the article, they talked about software issues. What if this was the amalgamation of all of the issues that they have ever had before in one plane? All of the lights went out, there was no power, and engines just failed. Is this one of those situations that when they do take a look at the black box, it will tell them everything that they knew since 2013? That would be very, 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 very crazy and interesting. Selafor went on to testify about the issues in front of Congress, accusing his former company of being involved in a criminal cover-up. He also implied something could happen to him as a result of his outspoken criticism. Around the same time, another Boeing whistleblowers emerged from the woodwork to offer similar critique of the airplane manufacturer, another of whom died. That spring, Boeing also admitted to falsifying documents about the 787, communicating that FFA that it may not have completed required inspections to confirm adequate bonding and grounding where the wings join the fuselage. But if that be the case, then the FAA would also be at fault for not inspecting. Now, I have done some work on fuselages before. That's not my claim to fame, but I did do a lot of welding for a company called Aranca. Now, Aranca was one of the few companies that used to build a section for the fuselage where the winds you has to go through. So it was this little mesh, looked like a spider web of sorts, but more like honeycomb, and they would build it into a spider web, and it would go into the fuselage to almost act as a brace. Now, they had to go through some ridiculous stringent testing. And I mean some ridiculous stringent testing. They had to pass a certain strength test, torque test, pull test. The aluminum had to pass a certain consistency. There were so many fail safes that you had to go through that if you ever failed one, it would never make it to production. So how they can tell you right here that it may not have met inspection requirements, but still went through inspections, would go all the way back to FFA. If that is the case, you might be looking at the government's part in this as well, in order to cover Boeing's behind, because as I said, Boeing has contracts in the Army and military funds as well. This could end up going way, way, way up. That misconduct, they say, may have occurred at the company. Now, if this comes back to where we find fault on everyone's end that cost the lives of over what was 400 people, 200 people. That's crazy to me. Everyone but one died on that plane. And at the end of the day, they'll be responsible for those lives. I hope that they get to the bottom of it because there is a lot of people waiting for answers. Families that have lost loved ones are waiting, just waiting patiently to find out exactly this could have been avoided and they could have their loved ones home today.